So Stannis Baratheon takes the top spot for Season 2, a seasoned battle commander. But let's take a look at who makes the most damaging decisions in Season 3. At number 17, we have Craster. So this takes place beyond the wall, where the Night's Watch is coming back from a mission, and they've lost a bunch of men. So they're heading back to the wall, and Craster's keep is on the way, so they decide to go. Reluctantly, Craster lets him stay. So Craster is eating pig in front of the Night's Watch, and this is an issue because Craster gave the Night's Watch really bad food. Even Carl Towner says that there's sawdust in the bread. He goes on to say that he wants what Craster's eating, and this makes Craster really mad. He goes on to threaten the Night's Watch, and he also says that the last person who calls him a bastard loses a hand. Boldly, Carl Towner calls Craster a daughter-fucking wildling bastard. Craster then charges at Towner and gets killed. At number 16, we have Jaime Lannister. So, shortly after Jaime and Brienne get captured by the Boltons, Brienne gets taken behind a tree to get raped by Bolton men. Jaime tells Locke that it's better off not to rape Brienne because she's the daughter of a nobleman, and he'll pay a high price to get her back, unbesmirched. So Locke tells his men to bring Brienne back. It's at this point that Jaime thinks him and Locke finally have an understanding, so he asks to have his chains loosened, and he also asks for some food, which Locke appears to agree to. But right after this, Locke tells Jaime that just because he's a high-profile prisoner doesn't mean he gets to act like he's above everyone, and he cuts off his hand to teach him a lesson. At number 15, we have Sir Davos. So, right after the Battle of Blackwater Bay, Salladhor Saan's men rescue Sir Davos because he was trapped on an island. After this, Sir Davos convinces Salladhor Saan to take him back to Dragonstone. It's here that Sir Davos speaks with both Melisandre and Stannis Baratheon, and they go back and forth for a bit. At the end of the conversation, Melisandre tells Sir Davos that death by fire is the purest death. Sir Davos brings out a blade and tries to kill Melisandre, and for his efforts, he's thrown in a black cell where he awaits execution, which is death by fire. At number 14, we have Daenerys Targaryan. So Daenerys arrives in Slaver's Bay, where she hopes to find an army. As her and Jeor Mormont are walking along the docks, a little girl approaches them and gives Daenerys a wooden ball. As Daenerys is about to open this wooden ball, Barristan Selmy appears out of nowhere and slaps the ball out of Daenerys' hands. Right after this, a manticore appears out of the ball and tries to kill Daenerys. Luckily, Barristan Selmy kills the manticore and then goes after the little girl, who disappears. The moral of this is that you can't just trust anyone, especially if you're the mother of dragons, because Daenerys could have easily been killed. At number 13, we have Arya, Gendry, and Hotple. This one is a bit unlucky because I'm pretty sure that Arya, Gendry, and Hotple did everything they could to stay off the King's Road, yet they were still captured by the Brotherhood. This leads to Arya's identity being exposed by the Hound in a pretty unfortunate sequence of events. So, Thoros of Myr is giving Arya, Gendry, and Hotple some final words before they head off to Riverrun. And as this is going on, the Brotherhood bring in the Hound. The Hound tells Thoros, "What the fuck are you doing with a Stark bitch?" So Arya becomes a captive. The next thing that happens is that Gendry ends up being sold to Melisandre, And you could argue that this is also Gendry's fault because Gendry ends up joining the Brotherhood. The initial plan was for Gendry, Arya, and Hotple to head off to Riverrun, but I guess plans change. And this is also after Arya becomes a captive. The last thing that happens is that Arya ends up being captured by the Hound. So Arya is still furious that Gendry was sold to Melisandre. And what really tips her over the edge is that Beric Dondarrion tells Arya that they're not going to Riverrun right away. They're going on a hunting party instead. So Arya ends up running away and ends up being captured by the Hound. A lot of these events are coincidental, but they're still mistakes. At number 12, we have Ross. I'm not sure why Ross works with Lord Varys. I think it's because she secretly hates Lord Baelish. There are times where Lord Baelish treats her badly, so she probably has animosity towards him. You could also argue that Lord Varys gave her a deal she couldn't refuse. But either way, this was a dangerous game and a huge risk. Because if Lord Baelish ever found out that Ross was betraying him and feeding his enemies information, she would be killed. And lo and behold, she gets killed by Joffrey. I'm not sure how Lord Baelish figured out that Ross was betraying him, but with the amount of resources and spies he has, it was just a matter of time. At number 11, we have Orell. Orell is one of the dumbest characters in the series. So, Mance Rayder sends a wildling party over the wall to scout the Night's Watch defenses. Somewhere along the way, supposedly near Queen's Crown, this wildling party encounters some civilians and kills most of them, except for one. Orell comes up with the brilliant idea of testing Jon Snow's loyalty and says he must kill the civilian. It appears that Jon Snow is about to do this, but he hesitates, so Ygritte kills him, and then everyone turns against Jon Snow. Shortly after this, with the help of Bran, the direwolf Summer attacks and kills some of these wildlings, and Jon Snow does the same, and then he escapes. All that Orell managed to accomplish from this is that he gets most of his scouting party killed, he allows Jon Snow to betray the wildlings and escape, and he also gets himself killed. Ridiculous. At number 10, we have Samwell Tarly. So, we know the Night's Watch goes beyond the wall, and after Craster's, they arrive at the Fist of the First Men. And around this area, they are attacked by White Walkers, and lose about 200 men. It was Sam's job to send the Ravens to report this, but he fails to do so. And we know it was Sam's job because the Lord Commander Jeor Mormont said it was. It's lucky that White Walkers can't get past the wall because had they been able to do so, they would have caused all kinds of chaos in Westeros and doomed the whole realm. At number 9, we have Beric Dondarrion. So, Sandor Clegane, the Hound, had just been captured by the Brotherhood Without Banners, and he's awaiting judgment. So, they're all sitting around a fire, and people are accusing the Hound of different crimes. But, funnily enough, nobody was a witness to these crimes. Except possibly Arya, who accused the Hound of killing the butcher's boy. But, because that was a direct order from Prince Joffrey, the Hound can't be accused of that murder. So instead, the Hound is given a trial by combat, and nobody volunteers, except Beric Dondarrion. So, with his flaming sword, Beric seems to be doing well against the Hound, but eventually, he gets killed. Shortly after Thoros brings Beric back to life, they both talk about how Beric hasn't learned from his mistakes, and that's the second time he'd been killed by a Clegane. And obviously, the Hound gets away. At number 8, we have Theon Greyjoy. Going back to Season 2, Theon Greyjoy refuses to leave Winterfell, so he ends up being captured by the Boltons, and all of his men get killed. He's taken to the Dreadfort where he's tortured both physically and mentally. Ramsay ends up freeing Theon, only to recapture him again. And Ramsay flays Theon to the point where his identity is completely changed, and he becomes a creature called Reek. At number 7, we have Salladhor Saan. During the Battle of Blackwater Bay, Salladhor Saan supplies 30 ships to Stannis' army, in return for riches and glory. Unfortunately, Stannis loses the battle. And not only does Salladhor Saan not get riches and glory, but he loses the men and all the ships that he had. And that's a big deal for a pirate king. At number 6, we have Edmure Tully. This takes place after Lord Hoster Tully's funeral. Blackfish, Edmure Tully, and Robb Stark all together having a discussion. Blackfish says that Edmure shouldn't disrespect Robb. Edmure says that he took the fight to Gregor Clegane, and that he could not withstand them. Robb replies saying that his orders were for Edmure to wait. What they're talking about here is the whole plan against Gregor Clegane was to draw him into the Riverlands and keep drawing him in further and further until he could be surrounded and killed. But instead, Gregor was driven from the Riverlands and he fled back to Castle Rock. And in the aftermath of this, 200 men were killed. We shouldn't underestimate what would have happened if Gregor Clegane was killed. It would have been a massive morale boost in the war efforts, and things could have turned out differently. At number 5, we have Jeor Mormont. I thought it was so cool that Jeor Mormont goes beyond the wall at the end of Season 1 to find out what's going on. And I'm sure other people did as well. But when you really think about it, this was a stupid decision because of how dangerous it was. We'd already lost the first ranger, Benjen Stark, beyond the wall, and other experienced rangers. And also, the Lord Commander himself was attacked by a white and nearly gets killed. So, this was always going to be a huge risk. And look what happens. 200 men are lost beyond the wall. And shortly after that, at Craster's, Jeor Mormont is betrayed by his brothers and gets killed by Ross. One of the saddest deaths in the series. At number 4, we have Robb Stark. I'm starting to think that Robb Stark is another Ned Stark because a lot of the decisions he makes are ridiculous. So we know the war wasn't going well for Robb Stark. At the beginning, it was the Starks versus the Lannisters, so it was equal ground. But somewhere along the way, the Lannisters teamed up with the Tyrells, giving them a much larger army and putting Robb Stark at a disadvantage. Which leads us to this. In Riverrun, Rickard Karstark murders 2 Lannister boys, and Robb Stark decides to execute him instead of keeping him as a prisoner and keeping his army that he needed for the war. To be fair, what Rickard Karstark said was out of line. It was somewhere along the lines of the King of the North, the king who lost the North. And we know what happened after that. But all Robb Stark managed to accomplish was losing the Karstark army because they go home. And number 2, he loses an experienced battle commander. And as if the war wasn't going bad enough already. At number 3, we have Meero and Prendon the Guzan. This takes place in Slaver's Bay, after Daenerys sacks the city of Astapor and sets her sights on Yunkai. So Daenerys camps outside Yunkai, and she receives 2 envoys, one of them being Meero, leader of the Second Sons, Prendon the Guzan, leader of the Stormcrows, and Daario Naharis, lieutenant of the Stormcrows. Negotiations take place, but they don't go so well, and after negotiations end, Meero Prendon the Guzan, and Daenerys go back to their camp. Miro decides that they're going to kill Daenerys. One of them will slip into Daenerys' camp and do it. Miro brings out 3 coins. One from Meereen, one from Volantis, and one from Braavos. The one who draws the Braavosi coin does the deed. Daenerys ends up drawing the Braavosi coin, but he refuses to kill Daenerys. Miro and Prendon the Guzan draw their swords. So Daenerys draws his, and Daenerys kills both Miro and Prendon the Guzan. I think the moral here is that you shouldn't force someone to do something they don't want to do, because both Miro and Prendon the Guzan lost way more than they should have. Not only did they lose their lives, but they lost the Second Sons and the Stormcrows, about 2,000 cavalry and 500 infantry. They were betrayed by Daenerys. They lost their contract with Yonkai, and they lost to Daenerys. At number 2, we have Kraznys Mo Nokloz. This one also takes place in Slaver's Bay, in Astapor. Daenerys wants an army, so she goes to Astapor for the Unsullied. She meets with Kraznys Mo Nokloz, and they talk about the Unsullied. At some point, negotiations begin. Kraznys says that Daenerys can only afford 100 Unsullied, with the ship and the gold that she has, but he'll give her an extra 10 to be generous. He goes on to ask her how Daenerys plans to pay for the other 7,890 Unsullied. I have to mention, during this entire time, Kraznys is insulting Daenerys, and he calls her a whore multiple times. His translator Missandei makes what he's saying not as bad as it actually is, which is kind of funny. Anyway, Daenerys decides to give Kraznys a dragon. Of course, Kraznys wants 2, but eventually they settle on 1, and the exchange begins. Daenerys gets the Unsullied, all 8,000, and even the ones in training, and Kraznys gets Drogon. Right after this, Daenerys decides to burn Kraznys. This has to be one of the worst trades in the history of trades, because Kraznys gets a dragon that he knows nothing about and can't control, and Daenerys gets the Unsullied that she knows everything about and she can control. I know dragons are priceless, but this is fucking ridiculous. And what happens after this is that not only does Kraznys die, he gets burned to death, but the entire city of Astapor gets sacked, and the city falls. At number 1, we have Robb Stark. So this takes place after the Karstarks have left Robb Stark's army, and Robb Stark is sweating because he needs more men, so he turns to Walder Frey. The only way Robb Stark is going to get more men from Walder Frey is if he gives him a royal wedding, and Edmure Tully becomes the sacrifice. At the Twins, everything seems to be going well. Food looks good, drinks are flowing, and everyone seems happy. There's also music playing in the background, but at some point, the music changes to the Rains of Castamere, and someone closes the door. The only character that notices all these things is Catelyn, and she's mortified. What happens after this is that the whole Stark house gets killed. All of Robb's men get killed. Catelyn Stark gets killed. Talisa Maega gets killed. Edmure Tully becomes a prisoner. Robb Stark gets killed. Robb Stark's direwolf, Grey Wind, gets killed. And just to drive this point home, the Starks have been around for thousands of years. So for them to get wiped out in one night at a wedding is fucking ridiculous. And that's about it.